For this lesson, we're going to look at equations that will have exponents on the variable. We will call these power equations because you can often refer to things with exponents as having a power on them. So solving a power equation involves just a couple simple steps. The first thing we want to do is we want to isolate whatever the variable is with an exponent. Second, what you're going to do is you're going to raise it to the reciprocal power. So if you have, for instance, if you have something squared, you'll put it to the 1/2 power. If you have something to the 3rd power, you'll raise it to the 1/3 to get rid of it. This is the same thing as taking the root. If you do something to the 1/2 power, it's the same as taking the square root. So just as a note, a 1/2 power is the same as a square root. So a 1/3 power is the same as the 3rd root. So if you've learned it that way, it's the same thing, and we'll use that. Now, just a couple notes that we need to keep in mind. If we are doing a problem with an even exponent, so solving something as an even exponent, we'll put it, say, to the 1/2 power, or the 1/4, or the 1/6, because it's an even exponent that we have. You're going to include, the answer will have a plus or minus. And how we write that is like this, with a plus and a minus underneath it. Now that's because even exponents produce absolute value. Now we don't do a lot of an absolute value in the answer. We don't do a lot of converting things into the absolute value. We just usually skip that step, the absolute value step, and we go straight to the plus or minus. But you have to remember, it's the absolute value that creates the plus or minus. If it's an odd exponent, there's no plus or minus. You only get one answer with the odd exponent. So this, you have to keep this in mind when you're doing these problems. All right, let's take a look at some examples. So if we're doing 2x squared equals 72, the first step is to get rid of the 2 in front. So we're going to divide both sides by 2, and you get x squared equal to 36. Now, when you solve this, many of you will think of this as you got to do the square root of both sides. Well, that's the same thing as putting it to the 1/2 power. A square root and a 1/2 power are the same. That's only helpful because at times you'll have a power that is a fraction, and just if you do its reciprocal, if you flip it over, it can solve it without having to worry about the root. So I'm going to put over here, same as the square root of x squared and equal to the square root of 36. Now what we have here is the square root of x squared. That's what produces the absolute value of x. Square root of 36 is just a 6. What we do is we recognize that here. When we do that, we just skip that step because what the absolute value then produces a plus or minus. Absolute value of 6 is 6, absolute value the opposite of 6 is also 6. So we're going to skip that step. When you do this, you just get x to the 2/2, which is x to the first, equals 36 to the 1/2 power plus or minus 6. So you have to just toss in that plus or minus to make sure you get both answers. If you put in 6 square it, times 2, you get 72. And if you put in also -6, -6 times -6 is a 36, times 2 will give you the 72 as well. So even exponents, make sure you put a plus or minus on it. Second problem we'll do is 4x to the 5th. Here our exponent, our power equation, does not have, it's an odd number, so we're not gonna need a plus or minus on it. So the first step is to divide both sides by 4. So if you take 128 and divide by 4, you get 32. And now I want to put both sides to the 1/5 power. So x to the 5th to the 1/5 power equals 32 to the 1/5 power. That's the same thing as doing the 5th root of x to the 5th equals the 5th root of 32. Now, many of our calculators you can do 5th roots on, but it's not always easy to find. It's probably easier just to put something to the 1/5 power. X to the 5th to the 1/5 is 5/5, that's x to the 1st. 32 to the 1/5 power is equal to 2. So no plus or minus for this one, because if you put in a negative, it would not work. So when we have an odd one, don't include the plus or minus. All right, our last one here, we're gonna have 3x to the 3rd equal to 10,002. On this one, I'm gonna be using a calculator to help me on it. So the first step is I'm gonna divide both sides by 3. So I'm gonna take this 10,002 and divide it by 3, 10,002. Let's go back and make that a 2. And divide by 3, and you get 3,334. So x cubed is going to equal 3,334. Now the next step is to put it to the 1/3 power, x cubed to the 1/3 power, 3,334 to the 1/3 power. Okay, and again, that's the same thing as taking the cube root of 3,334. Let's take a look at our calculator for that. So 3,334 raised to the, and I'm going to put this to the 1/3 power, and that gives me an answer of 14.939, so I'll round that to 14.94. But just compare this. If I were to go to a cube root, which I have on this calculator, so if I go down to the cube root, I'm going to take the cube root of my 3,334, you also get the same number. So when I round that, I'm going to get x equal to, this is an odd, so no plus or minus, 14.94 for my answer, rounded to 2 decimal places. All right, now, so a summary of what we do here is when we do these problems, you get the variable with the exponent by itself first, and then you raise it to the reciprocal power. When you do that, if you have the original power being an even number, put a plus or minus with it. When it's odd, you don't put a plus or minus with it, and that will give you the answer to the power equation.